The Draconis scout ships detected the human warship and transmitted frantic warnings, unable to believe their sensor readings, as the USS Hercules' staggering power readings and impossible advanced technology struck them with terror. Captain Sean Bell stood posture impeccable on the bridge, staring out the viewport at the distant gleam of Draconis ships growing on the sensors. The Hercules knifed through space, the only human ship in the Zarxian sector, dispatched alone to confront the belligerent Draconis before they ignited a galactic war. Tension crackled through the bridge. Earth's existence hung in the balance. Intelligence confirmed the reptilian Draconis, led by the ruthless warlord Ymir, were mere weeks from finishing a devastating antimatter cannon, a cannon they would use to blast human colonies and claim the ashes, unless Sean stopped them here. Now. The Galactic Council insisted diplomacy could sway Ymir, even as the Draconis blatantly violated treaties, annexed worlds, and slaughtered civilians. Earth knew better, knew that Ymir only understood one language, force, but the USS Hercules represented that force, humanity's bleeding-edge war technology, a masterpiece of lethality and power. She could reduce a planet to molten slag in minutes, and she was Sean's to command. Sean furrowed his eyebrows as the ship-wide alarm blared collision warning, signaling the Draconis ships had locked intercept trajectories. Ymir wanted to intimidate Earth into staying out of Draconis conquests, by force if needed, but Sean would show Ymir that humanity yielded to no one. He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands battle stations, I repeat, battle stations, this is not a drill." The Draconis fleet erupted out of hyperspace in perfect formation, an armada of gleaming warships, overflowing with advanced weaponry. On the DCS Firestorm's bridge, Warlord Ymir's reptilian eyes narrowed as he took in the lone human vessel on the display. The USS Hercules looked almost insignificant against the backdrop of his mighty fleet, 20 heavy cruisers and 50 destroyers, each a formidable instrument of war. "They must be insane challenging us with one ship," Commander Zaran hissed from his station, "or unbelievably arrogant." Ymir's lips peeled back, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Then we will teach them the price of their arrogance. The Draconis hegemony will not tolerate such insolence from upstarts." He savored the thought of crushing this impudent human captain who dared to defy him. It would be a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. The galaxy needed to understand that the Draconis were its new masters. "Hail their ship," Ymir ordered. "I want to see the fear in that human's eyes when he realizes his mistake." But before the communications officer could comply, Captain Bell's face appeared on the main view screen, broadcasting on all frequencies. Ymir snarled at the human's audacity to open communications first. "Warlord Ymir," Sean said, his voice hard as steel, "I am officially declaring war on the Draconis hegemony for your blatant violations of interstellar law and crimes against sentient species. You have conquered worlds, slaughtered civilians, and disrupted the peace. This ends now." The bridge went deathly silent for a split second before erupting into furious roars. Zaran pounded his fist on the console. "How dare they! A single ship against the might of the hegemony?" Semir felt rage boiling in his blood, a red mist descending over his vision. This arrogant human thought he could dictate terms, thought he could threaten the Draconis and walk away unscathed. "Enough!" Ymir bellowed. "All ships open fire. I want that human vessel reduced to atoms." The Draconis fleet surged forward as one, their weapons powering up with a rising hum. The USS Hercules held position, a defiant silver spear against the onrushing swarm of warships. Sean stood on the bridge, his face grim as he watched the approaching storm. "They're not backing down, sir," his tactical officer reported, hands flying over her console. "Neither are we," Sean replied, his voice like gravel. "Prepare to engage." The Draconis ships unleashed a hellstorm of plasma bolts and antimatter missiles, each glowing projectile streaking through the void towards the USS Hercules. The sheer volume of ordnance was staggering, a tidal wave of destruction powerful enough to atomize a small moon. Ymir allowed himself a toothy grin as he watched the wall of death hurtling towards the human vessel. The Hercules would be vaporized in an instant, a fitting end for their impudence. Humanity would learn the futility of challenging the hegemony. To his utter disbelief, the Hercules' shields flared to life, a scintillating bubble of energy enveloping the ship. The plasma bolts and missiles slammed into the barrier and dissipated harmlessly, the shield absorbing the tremendous energies without so much as a flicker. Impossible, Ymir thought, his pupils dilating. Federation intelligence had been adamant that human shield technology lagged generations behind the hegemonies. They couldn't have been this wrong. It defied belief. "All ships fire at will," Ymir roared, smacking his palm on the armrest. "I want that ship destroyed." The Draconis fleet responded instantly, pouring all their reactor power into their weapons. Space lit up as they fired salvo after salvo, the entire fleet focusing their might on the lone human vessel. The Hercules surged into motion, its engines flaring brilliantly as it accelerated towards the hegemony ships at a velocity that seemed to mock its size. The human ship wove through the storm of enemy fire with preternatural agility, rolling and jinking in evasive maneuvers that should have torn its hull apart from sheer stress. Ymir's eyes widened as he watched the display. Even with his basic grasp of physics, he knew the Hercules was pulling turns that would shear any Draconis ship in half. Yet the human vessel's hull showed no signs of strain, no buckling or deformation. It was impossible. It defied the laws of the universe. Captain Bell's face reappeared on the display, his gaze boring into Ymir's. "Warlord Ymir, I say again, stand down immediately or be destroyed. This is your final warning." Ymir surged to his feet, his vision bleeding red. "Cut him off," he bellowed at the comm officer, apoplectic with rage. The screen went blank as the channel was hurriedly muted. "Somebody tell me why that ship is still in my sky," Ymir snarled, whirling on his bridge crew. "I want it out of my sight. I want it in pieces." The Hercules charged onward, closing the distance to the Draconis fleet at a breathtaking pace. Ymir white-knuckled the armrests of his command throne, talons gouging the metal. His mind raced. The human ship hadn't even fired yet. What was their strategy? What nasty surprise were they planning to spring? "Warlord!" The sensor officer's panicked shout snapped Ymir's attention back to the present. "Massive energy surge from the human vessel." Ymir shot to his feet, muscles coiled. This was it. The Hercules was about to unleash some kind of doomsday weapon, an alpha strike to gut the hegemony fleet in one. "Launch signatures," the sensor officer reported. Multiple small craft emerging from the Hercules. "Fighters," Ymir hissed. "That's impossible. The Hercules is a battleship. It's too small to have a fighter complement." Yet the evidence was undeniable. Dozens of glinting specks poured from the human ship's launch bays, compact, deadly, and moving at speeds Ymir had never seen from fighter craft. They fell upon the Draconis ships like a swarm of razor wasps, juking and weaving through the criss-crossing web of point defense fire with inhuman precision. It was like watching a masterfully choreographed dance, Ymir thought with a mix of awe and dread. The human fighters moved in perfect synchronicity, each covering the other's angles, not a single wasted motion. In contrast, the Draconis ship's turret fire was clumsy and uncoordinated, a child swatting clumsily at flies. The fighters tore into the hegemony ships, strafing the larger vessels' hulls with plasma cannons, and what looked like, Ymir squinted at the readout in disbelief, some kind of miniaturized black hole torpedoes. Ymir had heard whispers of such theoretical weapons from the hegemony's own bleeding-edge research labs, but to see them deployed in combat, it beggared belief. Our dozen Draconis destroyers shuddered under the onslaught, their shields flaring and dying as the human fighters pummeled them mercilessly. Explosions stippled the ship's hulls as the torpedoes punched through, the miniature singularities consuming entire decks in flashes of collapsing matter. "Evasive maneuvers," Ymir roared. "Anti-fighter screening formation now." But the Draconis ships, ponderous and clumsy next to the nimble human fighters, were simply too slow to react. The fighters looped around for another pass, their plasma cannons perforating a heavy cruiser's bridge in a fiery slash. 3 more attack runs, 3 more waves of ruin rippling through the hegemony battle line. In what felt like moments, half of Ymir's once mighty armada lay crippled or destroyed, leaking atmosphere and bodies. The fighters streaked back to the Hercules, their hulls unmarred, their lethal precision undiminished. And through it all, the Hercules' shields hadn't so much as flickered. The Hercules' forward batteries erupted, disgorging searing beams of star-core plasma. The lances of pure destruction raked across the Draconis battle line, their touch instantly volatilizing hull plating and the flesh underneath. The beams punched through shields like they weren't there, spearing clean through ship after ship, and igniting their atmospheres in gouts of flame. Ymir gripped the chairs of his command chair, claws carving furrows in the metal. As the Hercules scythed through his fleet, the human ship moved with a terrible, implacable purpose, its weapons dealing death with each shot. Draconis ships shattered and died under the onslaught, consumed by ravenous plasma fires that melted bulkheads and vaporized crew. "Warlord, we're losing ships faster than we can count," Zaran shouted over the chaos of damage reports flooding the bridge. "We can't take much more of this." Ymir snarled wordlessly, refusing to give the order to retreat even as the Hercules butchered his fleet. To flee would be to admit weakness, to cede victory to the humans. Unacceptable. The firestorm shuddered as a plasma beam grazed its shields, the energy barrier barely holding. Ymir braced against his restraints, the deck lurching under his feet. Damage alarms howled as the beam burned through armor in a molten gash. "Shields at 30%, an officer yelled. "We can't take another hit like that." Ymir opened his mouth to bark orders, but his words died in his throat as the main view screen flickered. The human captain's face stared back at him, Sean's eyes hard as flint. "Warlord Ymir," Sean's voice was cold as void. "Earth has been preparing for this day since your first atrocity. We've watched, we've planned, and now we act. The Hercules is just the first. Surrender now, and your crew may yet survive." "Survive?" Ymir spat the word. "You expect me to bend knee to you, to Earth? I'll die first." Sean's expression didn't flicker. "Earth doesn't want your submission, Warlord. Your rule is at an end one way or another." The screen went black, and in that instant, the Hercules opened up with every gun. A dozen searing plasma beams stabbed out, piercing the firestorm's failing shields and punching into its hull. The dreadnought shuddered like a beast in its death throes, secondary explosions walking across its length, as the plasma ignited fuel lines and ammunition stores. Ymir clung to his chair as the bridge dissolved into chaos, his crew scrambling futilely to save the dying ship. Zaran rushed to his side, shouting something lost in the cacophony. Ymir met his second's eyes, seeing his own rage and despair mirrored there. This couldn't be happening. The Draconis were the superior species, destined to rule the stars, yet here they were, beaten and broken by a single human ship. The shame of it burned worse than the plasma fires ravaging the firestorm. Ymir's eyes locked on the console, the Hercules looming large as the dreadnought's cameras failed one by one. That damned human ship, so sleek and deadly, the instrument of his ruin. He watched it until the final screen went dark, the image searing into his mind. Even as the last of the firestorm's systems died and the ship began to tear itself apart, Ymir sat rigidly in his command chair, unable to process the magnitude of his defeat. His grand invasion, his glorious conquest of the galaxy, all turned to ash by a single human vessel. The Hercules swept through the debris field that had once been a proud Draconis battle fleet, its shields shrugging off the few scattered shots from the survivors. The human ship moved with a predator's grace, unhurried and unafraid. It had proven its power beyond any doubt. Ymir's claws tightened on the armrests as the firestorm shuddered under another barrage, consoles sparking and belching smoke. The once proud flagship was coming apart at the seams, its hull breached in a dozen places, atmosphere venting into the void. "Warlord, we must withdraw," Zaran shouted over the chaos. "We can't win this." So Ymir snarled, hating the truth in his second's words. To flee was to admit defeat, to cede the Zarxian sector to the humans. But what choice did he have? The Hercules had torn through his fleet like a plasma torch through paper. He opened his mouth to give the order to retreat, to salvage what remained of his forces, and regroup in Draconis space. But before the words could leave his lips, a new alarm blared through the bridge, shrill and urgent. "Massive energy surge from the human ship," the sensor officer reported, his voice shaking. "Off the scales." Emir whipped around to the view screen, eyes widening as space seemed to warp and twist around the Hercules' bow. A swirling vortex of darkness blossomed from the human ship, a gaping wound in the fabric of reality. It expanded rapidly, tendrils of distorted space-time reaching out to ensnare the remnants of the Draconis fleet. Emir could only watch in numb horror as the singularity tore into his ships, the twisted wreckage stretching and deforming as it vanished into the black hole's insatiable maw. Proud Draconis warships crumpled like tin foil, their hulls compressing into unrecognizable tangles of metal, before disappearing forever. The firestorm bucked violently as the edge of the vortex clawed at its failing shields. Alarms shrieked as the ship's structural integrity hit critical levels, the hull groaning like a wounded beast. "Shields collapsing," Zaran reported, gripping his console. "Hull breach imminent." But Emir barely heard him, his gaze locked on the roiling singularity consuming his fleet. The horrifying realization crashed over him like a frigid wave. The humans could have unleashed this weapon at any time. The entire battle, the Hercules' exquisite dance of destruction, had been a mere demonstration, a message. The warlord's blood ran cold as Sean's face filled the view screen once more, the human's eyes hard as diamonds. "Warlord Emir," Sean said, his voice like a tolling bell, "consider this a preview of what awaits the Draconis hegemony, should you fail to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw from your conquered territories." The human's gaze seemed to pierce Emir's very soul. "Humanity will no longer stand by as your kind terrorizes the galaxy. This is your only warning. The Hercules is but the vanguard of a fleet of ships, each ready to rain Earth's wrath upon Draconis." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving Emir to stare at the yawning void where his armada had been. He slumped back in his chair, a cold sweat beading his scales. He had been so sure of the hegemony's superiority, so confident that the Draconis war machine would roll over humanity like it had so many others. But the humans had played him for a fool, luring him in only to reveal the true depth of their power. And now his hubris would be paid for in Draconis blood. The bridge of the firestorm lay in ruins, consoles sparking and debris strewn across the deck. Emir sat rigidly in his command chair, staring at the view screen where the human captain's face had been moments before. The warlord's mind reeled, struggling to process the magnitude of his defeat. Around him, the few surviving crew members worked frantically to keep the crippled dreadnought from tearing itself apart. Damage reports flooded in, each more dire than the last. Life support failing, reactor containment critical, hull breaches on multiple decks. The once mighty firestorm was now a dying beast, gutted by the Hercules' weapons. Zaran limped to Emir's side, his uniform scorched and torn. "Warlord, we must surrender," he urged, his voice raw. "We cannot win this fight." Emir's claws dug into the armrests, his eyes still locked on the screen. Every instinct screamed at him to keep fighting, to go down in a blaze of defiance. But the cold, hard truth settled in his gut like a leaden weight. The Hercules had crushed his fleet with horrifying ease, and the human ship's final message had made it clear that this was only the beginning of what Earth could unleash. With a snarl of rage and despair, Emir smacked his head on the comm panel. "This is Warlord Emir of the Draconis hegemony," he ground out, each word bitter as bile. "We surrender. All Draconis forces stand down immediately. Cease all hostilities against Earth and its allies." As the message broadcast on all frequencies, Emir could picture the shock and disbelief rippling through the hegemony's ranks. For generations, The Draconis had prided themselves on their military prowess, their ability to crush any foe through sheer might. To be so utterly humiliated by a single human vessel was a blow to the very core of their identity. Ymir knew he would face severe consequences for this failure. The hegemony did not tolerate defeat, and the warlord would be lucky to escape with his life. But what choice did he have? The Hercules had made it brutally clear that any further resistance would result in the complete annihilation of the Draconis species. As the firestorm limped back towards Draconis space, transmitting the stand-down order to all hegemony forces, Ymir slumped in his chair, his rage giving way to a numb despair. How had it come to this? The Draconis had always assumed that humanity was just another primitive race to be conquered and subjugated, like so many others before them. They had never imagined that the humans could be hiding such devastating military capabilities, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a mistake that had cost the hegemony dearly. In a single battle, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted irrevocably. The Draconis, once the uncontested masters of the stars, had been brought low by a species they had dismissed as weak and inferior. Vymir's claws gouged furrows into the metal of his armrests as he contemplated the future. The hegemony would have to adapt if it hoped to survive in this new reality. No longer could they rely on brute force to impose their will on the galaxy. They would have to find a way to coexist with the other races, to negotiate and compromise instead of conquer and subjugate. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a proud warrior race like the Draconis, but the alternative was extinction. The Hercules had proven that humanity would no longer tolerate the hegemony's aggression, and Ymir knew that Earth possessed the power to make good on its threats. As the firestorm crossed into Draconis territory, the warlord's thoughts turned to the difficult task ahead. He would have to face the fury of the hegemony's leadership to explain how he had led their mighty armada to ruin. But more than that, he would have to convince them that a fundamental change was needed if the Draconis were to have any hope of a future. It would not be easy. The hegemony's militaristic culture was deeply ingrained, and many would resist the idea of embracing diplomacy over force. But Ymir knew that the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. The Hercules had given them a glimpse of the abyss, and the warlord was determined to do whatever it took to pull his people back from the brink. Zaren's voice cut through Ymir's dark musings. "Warlord, we're receiving a transmission from the homeworld. The High Council is demanding an explanation for our surrender." Ymir straightened in his chair, his expression hardening into a mask of drive. "Put them through," he growled. "It's time they understood the new reality we face." As the view screen flickered to life, displaying the enraged faces of the Draconis leadership, Ymir steeled himself for the confrontation to come. It would be a battle as difficult as any he had fought, but one he knew he must win. The future of his species depended on it. News of the Draconis hegemony surrender spread like wildfire across the galaxy, transmitted on every frequency and splashed across every holo display. In the bustling markets of Kyria Prime, shoppers paused mid-transaction as the announcement blared from public screens. Cheers erupted from the crowd, tentacled appendages waving in celebration. The Kyrians had long suffered under the hegemony's iron grip, their resources plundered and their people enslaved. Similar scenes played out on 100 different worlds. The Valtari, a proud avian race, sang songs of freedom in their crystal spires. The Gorian collective mind buzzed with relief, their hive ships pulsing with renewed energy. Across the galaxy, oppressed races celebrated the fall of their tyrannical overlords. But not all greeted the news with joy. On the shadowed streets of Nexus Station, a group of Draconis expatriates huddled around a flickering holo display, their scaled faces etched with worry. "What happens now?" one of them hissed, his tail lashing anxiously. "The hegemony kept order in the outer rim. Without their fleet, the pirates and warlords will run rampant." His companion nodded grimly. "And what of the humans? They possess weapons that could subjugate us all. Who will stop them from becoming the new tyrants?" Similar concerns echoed in the halls of power across the galaxy. In the gleaming chambers of the Galactic Council, Representatives from 100 worlds gathered for an emergency session, their faces tense with apprehension. "The humans have upset the balance of power," the Valtari delegate declared, his feathers ruffled with agitation. "Their advanced weaponry poses a clear threat to galactic stability. We must impose sanctions, limit their military capabilities before it's too late." The Gorian representative pulsed with disagreement. "Sanctions? Against the race that just freed us from Draconis oppression? The humans are heroes, not villains. We should be forging closer ties, not pushing them away." As the debate raged on, a holographic image flickered to life in the center of the chamber. The assembled delegates fell silent as they recognized the haggard face of Captain Sean Bell. "Esteemed members of the Council," Sean began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "I come before you not as a conqueror, but as a humble servant of peace." He paused, his eyes haunted. "The victory we achieved against the Draconis came at a great cost. During the battle, the Hercules experimental reactor core was damaged, exposing my crew to lethal levels of radiation. Even now, as I speak to you, they are slowly succumbing to the effects." A murmur of shock rippled through the chamber. Sean continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "My brave men and women sacrificed their lives to protect the galaxy from Draconis aggression. They believed in a future where all races could live in harmony, free from the threat of tyranny." He fixed the delegates with a pleading gaze. "I ask you now to honor their sacrifice. Let us not squander this opportunity for lasting peace. Let us work together, as allies and friends, to build a galaxy where no one need live in fear." As Sean's image faded, a somber silence descended over the chamber. The weight of his words hung in the air, a reminder of the terrible price of freedom. Light years away, in the cold depths of a Draconis prison ship, Warlord Ymir sat shackled in a bare cell. He barely registered the sound of the door opening, his once proud posture slumped in defeat. A pair of guards hauled him to his feet, their claws digging into his scales. "On your feet, traitor," one of them snarled. "It's time for your trial." Ymir stumbled as they dragged him through the ship's corridors, his mind numb with despair. He had failed his people, failed the hegemony, and now he would pay the price. The trial was a blur of accusations and condemnation. The Draconis leadership, desperate to save face, laid the blame for their defeat squarely at Ymir's feet. He offered no defense, no excuses. In his heart, he knew he deserved far worse than the lifetime of hard labor they sentenced him to. As the prison transport carried him to the remote penal colony, where he would spend the rest of his days, Ymir stared out at the stars, his thoughts turning to the humans who had defeated him so utterly. The memory of the Hercules, that silver spear of retribution, haunted his every waking moment. Would the Draconis ever recover from this humiliation? Could they find a place in this new galactic order, or were they doomed to fade into obscurity, a once mighty race brought low by their own arrogance? Ymir had no answers, only the bitter ashes of defeat. As the transport descended towards the barren surface of the penal colony, he steeled himself for the hard years ahead. It was no less than he deserved, he supposed, no less than the price of his failure. The galaxy, meanwhile, spun on, forever changed by the actions of a few brave humans. The sacrifices of Captain Bell and his crew had bought a chance for peace, but it was up to the rest of the galaxy to seize it. The future, as always, remained uncertain. In the echoing halls of Earth's capital, the debate raged on. Admiral Ivanova slammed her fist on the podium, her voice rising above the clamor. The Hercules proved that we cannot afford to be complacent. The galaxy is a hostile place, and we must be prepared to meet any threat head-on. Across the chamber, Senator Thornton shook his head, his aged features etched with concern. "And what would you have us do, Admiral? Pour all our resources into building more ships, more weapons? We barely survived the last war. Another arms race could be our undoing." The argument went back and forth, each side presenting their case with fervor. In the end, a compromise was reached. The military would receive additional funding, but with strict oversight and a focus on defensive technologies. It was a decision that would be put to the test sooner than anyone expected. The first reports were dismissed as isolated incidents, a colony going dark, a trade ship failing to arrive at its destination. But as more and more worlds fell silent, a pattern began to emerge. Something was out there, preying on the edges of human space. The truth arrived in the form of a battered scout ship, its hull scored with strange angular markings. Its crew, pale and trembling, spoke of a nightmare made flesh, a race of beings that seemed to meld with the very fabric of space, their ships appearing out of nowhere to rain destruction upon their victims. They called themselves the Void Wraiths, and their technology was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Even the most advanced scanners couldn't track their ships, and their weapons tore through shields like they were paper. The Hercules-class ships, once the pride of Earth's fleet, found themselves outmatched. Their crews fought bravely, but for every Void Wraith ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Slowly, inexorably, the alien advance pushed closer to the heart of human territory. In the face of this existential threat, Earth's leaders made a desperate gamble. They reached out to the remnants of the Draconis hegemony, their former enemy, proposing an alliance against the common foe. The response was a surprise to everyone. Ymir, the once proud Draconis warlord, emerged from his exile to take command of his people's forces. Time and hardship had left their mark on him. His scales dulled and his eyes haunted, but the fire of his drive still burned bright. "We will fight," he told the human ambassador, his voice rasping with age and bitterness. "Not for you, but for our own survival. The Void Wraiths threaten us all." And so, a fragile alliance was born. Human and Draconis ships fought side by side, their crews learning to work together in the face of annihilation. They clashed with the Void Wraiths in a series of desperate battles, each one more costly than the last. The turning point came in the skies above a nameless world, where the bulk of the Allied fleet met the Void Wraith armada in a final, titanic confrontation. The USS Hercules, battle-scarred but unyielding, led the charge, its weapons blazing as it carved a path through the enemy lines. For a moment it seemed as if victory was within reach, but the Void Wraiths had one last terrible surprise in store. From the depths of their formation, a monstrous ship emerged, a vessel so vast it seemed to blot out the stars. The Void Wraith mothership, a thing of nightmares made real. The Hercules didn't hesitate. With a burst of its engines, it hurtled towards the behemoth, weapons firing in a continuous stream. The mothership's shields absorbed the onslaught, its hull shimmering with eldritch energy. "All power to weapons," Captain Nakamura ordered, her face grim. "We have to take that thing down despite the toll." The Hercules surged forward, its hull groaning under the strain. The mothership loomed before it, an implacable wall of alien metal. The human ship plunged into a seething maelstrom of deadly energies, its shields flaring and failing under the onslaught. With a final desperate salvo, the Hercules unleashed everything it had. A lance of pure, blinding light erupted from its forward batteries, piercing the heart of the Void Wraith vessel. For a moment, the mothership seemed to shudder, its structure twisting in ways that defied physics. And then, with a silent scream that tore at the minds of every living thing for light years around, it shattered. Fragments of impossible geometry spun away into the void, the Void Wraith's greatest weapon reduced to glittering debris. But the victory had come at a terrible price. The Hercules, its hull ruptured and its systems failing, drifted in the silence of space. Its crew, those who had survived the final assault, lay still at their stations, their lives spent in defense of their species. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Allied fleet limped back to friendly space, the true cost of the war began to sink in. Countless lives had been lost, worlds left ravaged and lifeless, and yet, amidst the grief and the pain, there was also a flicker of hope. For in the crucible of conflict, humanity and the Draconis had found a common ground. They had fought and bled together, and in doing so had forged a bond that would not easily be broken. As the galaxy began to rebuild, as the scars of war slowly started to heal, the two races stood side by side. They had been enemies once, but now they were something more. They were allies, partners in a universe that had proven far more dangerous and wondrous than either had ever imagined. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. The sacrifices of the Hercules and her crew, and all those who had given their lives in the war against the Void Wraiths, would not be forgotten. Their memory would live on, a testament to the indomitable spirit of life in the face of even the darkest adversity. The story of the galaxy had entered a new chapter, one written in the blood and tears of heroes. And as humanity and the Draconis looked to the stars, they did so with a newfound sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by the bonds of shared struggle and triumph. The galaxy slowly mended in the years after the Void Wraith War, stitched together by the newfound cooperation between humanity and the Draconis. Joint colonies sprang up on war-torn worlds, the two races pooling their resources and expertise to rebuild what had been lost. Human engineers worked side by side with Draconis technicians, repairing shattered infrastructure and erecting new cities from the rubble. On the colony of New Haven, Draconis and human children played together in the streets, their laughter echoing through neighborhoods where once only the sound of gunfire had been heard. In the markets, Draconis merchants haggled good-naturedly with human customers, trading exotic spices and gleaming tech. But even as the wounds of war healed, the scars remained. In the dimly lit corners of Draconis taverns, old soldiers muttered darkly into their drinks, their eyes glinting with resentment. They spoke of the humiliation of surrender, of the shame of bowing to human demands. Some even whispered of a day when the Draconis would rise again, when they would reclaim their rightful place as the galaxy's masters. Similar sentiments festered in certain quarters of human society. Emboldened by their victory over the Void Wraiths, hardline factions within the military and government argued for a more aggressive posture towards the other races of the galaxy. They saw the Draconis alliance as a temporary necessity, a means to an end until humanity was strong enough to stand alone. Tensions simmered below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment, and then came the discovery that changed everything. It was a team of human and Draconis archaeologists who made the find, deep in the ruins of a long-dead civilization on a remote planet. As they sifted through the crumbling remains of an ancient city, they stumbled upon a hidden vault, its walls covered in strange, alien script. Deciphering the language took months, but when the archaeologists finally unlocked the vault's secrets, they could scarcely believe what they found. The vault contained detailed records of the civilization's final days, of a desperate war against an enemy that had once been their own. The Void Wraiths, the records revealed, were not an alien race at all. They were the descendants of a human colony ship that had been lost centuries ago, warped and twisted by their isolation in the depths of space. The very enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy had sprung from humanity's own mistakes. News of the discovery spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of controversy and recrimination. The other races of the galaxy, already wary of humanity's growing power, now looked upon them with open suspicion and fear. If humans had inadvertently created the Void Wraiths, what other horrors might they unleash upon the galaxy? Even the Draconis, humanity's closest allies, began to distance themselves. Old grudges resurfaced as Draconis hardliners seized upon the growing anti-human sentiment to push their own agendas. Emir, now an aging statesman, found himself increasingly isolated as he fought to hold the fragile peace together. In meeting after meeting with human and Draconis leaders, he pleaded for calm and cooperation, warning of the consequences of letting old hatreds tear them apart. But even Emir's considerable diplomatic skills could not prevent the outbreak of violence. On the human colony of Meridian, a group of Draconis extremists launched a surprise attack, slaughtering hundreds of civilians before being driven back by the colony's defenses. The attack sent shockwaves through the galaxy. And humanity's response was swift and furious. Warships that had once fought side by side now faced each other across battle lines, as the two races slid inexorably towards a conflict that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Hackett, the supreme commander of humanity's military, stared grimly at the tactical display. The Draconis fleet was formidable, their ships overflowing with advanced weaponry. If it came to all-out war, the losses on both sides would be catastrophic. "We can't let it come to that," Hackett muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "There has to be another way." But as the drums of war beat ever louder, it seemed that the only path left was one of mutually assured destruction. The very peace that so many had sacrificed for now teetered on the brink, threatening to collapse into a conflict that would leave the galaxy in ruins. It was in this darkest hour that Ymir made his move. In a secret meeting with a small group of human and Draconis leaders, he proposed a radical solution. If the two races could not coexist, then perhaps it was time for them to go their separate ways. The plan was simple yet audacious. Humanity and the Draconis would divide the galaxy between them, each retreating to their own sphere of influence to rebuild and reflect on the mistakes of the past. It was a bitter pill to swallow, an admission of failure after so many years of working towards unity. But as the alternative was too horrific to contemplate, the leaders eventually agreed. In a solemn ceremony, the Treaty of Separation was signed, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain future. As the human and Draconis fleets withdrew to their respective corners of the galaxy, a somber mood settled over the stars. On worlds that had once buzzed with the energy of cooperation and rebuilding, an uneasy silence fell. In the great halls of power on Earth and Draconis Prime, leaders who had once spoken of a bright future now grappled with the harsh realities of a galaxy divided. The dream of unity, it seemed, had been nothing more than a fleeting illusion. And yet, even in this time of separation and uncertainty, there were those who still held on to hope. In the joint colonies that had been established during the brief era of peace, humans and Draconis, who had formed bonds of friendship and family, refused to let old hatreds tear them apart. They were the living embodiment of the idea that had once seemed so promising, that two races, no matter how different, could find common ground and build a better future together. As the galaxy watched and waited, these small pockets of unity would serve as a reminder of what had been and what could still be, if only the races of the stars could find the wisdom and the courage to overcome their differences. The legacy of the Hercules and the brave souls who had sacrificed everything to defend the galaxy from the void wraiths loomed large in the collective memory. Their story stood as a testament to the heights that could be achieved when differences were set aside in the face of a common threat. But it also served as a warning, a reminder that even the greatest victories could sow the seeds of future conflict if the underlying tensions and mistrust were not addressed. As humanity and the Draconis embarked on their separate journeys, each grappling with the challenges of a new reality, one thing remained clear. The road to true and lasting peace would be a hard one, fraught with setbacks and challenges. But perhaps in the end, it was a journey that could only be taken one step at a time with patience, understanding, and a willingness to learn from the mistakes of the past. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.